guys, so today we're going to be talking about bitonality or polytonality. Now really that's just a fancy word that means playing in a scale that's not the diatonic scale of the key that you're in. So if you have a chord progression in C major, for example, instead of playing in C major, you can play in, say, A major. Right? And the fact that you're playing in a different scale or in a different key or in the wrong key, you're going to be using notes outside of the C major scale, like from this point of view, all the flats and sharps. So the C sharp, F sharp and G sharp all outside of the C major scale, and in that way you're sort of creating tension before quickly resolving it. Now I wanted to give just a quick little aside about creating tension. Now I said in my earlier videos that creating tension is about just playing the wrong notes. So in the key of C major, you create tension by playing the notes outside of the scale or the black notes, the sharps and flats. Now, at a really abstract and high level, that's all that creating tension means. And all these sort of ideas and techniques and concepts that I'm going through, like using passing notes, or using bitonality, or using ambiguous or symmetrical scales that I'm going to cover in another video, they're all just ways of structuring the wrong notes that you play. So instead of just playing wrong notes randomly, so just something like, so instead of just sort of playing wrong notes and creating tension randomly like that, you play the wrong notes in a structured way, like playing in a different scale, or playing passing notes on the way to a target note, or using symmetrical and ambiguous scales. Right, and in that way you are playing the wrong notes, therefore creating tension, but you're doing it in a structured way that has sort of an underlying concept and idea behind it. And in that way you can sort of just create specific, precise sounds rather than just playing wrong notes and right notes randomly, which I suppose is a way of improvising because, you know, you're technically playing wrong notes and then right notes, but it doesn't really have any underlying harmony or idea or structure behind it. So bitonality is a structured way of playing these wrong notes. By playing the A major scale over the chord progression in the key of C major, I played some wrong notes, but very specific wrong notes, and wrong notes that have some relation to the right notes that they play on either side, because they're all in a major scale. So even though you're playing sort of wrong notes, your ear kind of hears like, oh, you know, it still sounds like there's some kind of structure or underlying foundation behind the wrong notes that you're playing, because you still have that major sound on top of a chord progression, even though it's in a different key. Now, it may take a little bit of time to get used to the sounds that you create when employing bitonality, because it does create some strange sounds. It's not necessarily sort of better or worse, it's all entirely subjective, but you do need to sort of play around with this to sort of get a bit of an idea about what kind of sounds you can create and how to use it. But there are sort of some key ideas that you can use when picking a different scale to play in. So let's, for an example, take the song Fly Me to the Moon. So the proper version, or the single tonal version, goes like this. Right, so that was in the key of A minor, A natural minor. And the chord progression is just a cycle of fifths going through the A minor chords. Now we're going to play that same chord progression, so we're going to stay in the key of A minor in our left hand, but let's play the melody in the key of G minor, which means, or G natural minor, which is the relative minor of B flat major, so it's got the B flat and the E flat. So now, starting from the same note, the C, it'll sound something like this. sounded a bit more jarring and a bit strange. You can still tell that it's Fly Me to the Moon because most of the notes are correct and the rhythm's exactly the same. But the sort of weird notes, the B flat and the E flat that I'm playing, because we're playing in a different key in our right hand, sounds a bit different and a bit strange. And just a little tip, when you're playing sort of using this idea, bitonality, it helps if you don't sort of overemphasize or overstress the notes outside of the scale so that they sound a little bit more like passing notes, because doing something like this sounds a bit more wacky and off. So I sort of touch it a little bit more lightly, make it a little bit softer and a little bit shorter, so it sounds a bit more like a passing note rather than sort of really hammering away at it, so it sounds a bit more like... Right, some notes you can't avoid, you have to sit on that one, but anyway, that's just a little tip. Now, so one way to pick a different scale to play over a chord progression is to think about the cycle of fifths. Now again, go watch my video on the cycle of fifths if you haven't already, because it is quite important. But essentially the cycle of fifths shows you how closely related two keys are. So if we have a simple chord progression in C major, if you have a look at the sort of cycle of fifths wheel, you'll see on either side of the C an F and a G. So 5 notes up and 5 notes down. That means that the G major and the F major are very closely related to the C. So if you've got a chord progression in C and you play the F major over it, or the G major over it, it's going to sound sort of much more closely related and a little bit nicer than playing, say, like G flat major, which is sort of all the way very far away from the C. The F major, I should say, is a little bit iffy because it's got the B flat, which is the flat 7th from the point of view of the C major. So it sounds a little bit clashing and jarring because you've got the major 7th and you're playing the minor 7th. But anyway, let's ignore that for the moment. So now let's take that simple 2-5-1 in C major and sort of play around with it a bit. So on the D minor 7, generally you would play, again, the C major scale or the D Dorian mode. But let's, instead of that, play the D Phrygian mode, which is the B flat major scale. So we've got the B flat and the E flat. Right, that sounds a bit more out there and strange. It's got a bit more of a sort of a Phrygian feel. The flat 2 sort of creates a bit of a different feel. But it still works quite well because the guide tones of that chord, the F and the C, are still in that new scale. Now let's look at the G7. The G7, let's use sort of a similar idea. So the G7 is in the key of C major. But if you've seen my lesson on chord substitution, you'll know a really common one in jazz is the tritone substitution, which essentially tritone substitutes the chord. So instead of G7, we're going to have D flat 7. Now that works because the guide tones stay the same. The 3rd and the 7th just flip. If you don't understand what that is, you can go have a look at my lesson on chord substitution. But anyway, that's a tritone substitution of the G7. Now, the D flat 7 is in the key of G flat major. So over the G7, let's play G flat major. That sounds kind of weird, a little bit sort of out there, but it still has those 2 guide tones, so it still kind of works and fits. Similarly, over the G7, you can play a G sharp melodic minor, and that looks like this. So it's got G sharp, A sharp, B, which is our guide tone, so that's good. C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, which is our F, which is another guide tone, so that's good. Then G, which is our root note, which is also good, and then back to the G sharp. Right, and another name for that is the G altered dominant mode, or G altered mode. And that essentially, all that means is you're altering every single note except for the root, the third and the seventh, or the most important notes in the scale. But that's a mode of the melodic minor scale, which I'll cover in a separate video. But essentially, all you need to know is when you're playing, for the same idea, if you've got a G7, you can play the G sharp melodic minor. And it kind of still works because you've got the guide tones and the root in there. And then finally we get to the C major 7, and over that let's play the D flat major scale. Now that creates a bit more tension because it doesn't have either of the guide tones in there, but it does have the root. But the reason that kind of works is because it's a semitone off, it's really quite easy to resolve that tension by just slipping down one semitone on any of the notes. And this technique is actually called side slipping, which is effectively a specific type of bitonality. And all it really means is slipping to the side by a semitone. So instead of playing C major over a C major 7 chord, you can play D flat major or B major. So you can play something like, again, just played the D flat major scale all the way up to the C, and then slid back one semitone down to the B, which is a guide tone. So mixing all of those together fluently is quite difficult and might take you a little bit of time to get used to. But it's sort of another little idea or concept you can keep in your little palette of improvisation techniques. Now I should say that in all of those examples, I've been using bitonality to create tension by playing sort of wrong sounding things and then resolving it back to right sounding things or back into the scale. But you can actually also use bitonality to create sounds that sound better than just using the scale that you're in. So over that same chord progression, that's all in the key of C major, so generally you would improvise over it using C major. And that sounds fine, but by using bitonality, you can actually make that sound stronger and better. And the way this is done is as follows. If you've seen my video on avoid notes, you'll know that each of those chords has an avoid note. The B minor 7 has the B as an avoid note because it creates an awkward interval and sound with the F. The G7 has the C as an avoid note because it creates an awkward interval with the third. And the C major has the F as an avoid note because it creates an awkward interval with the E, the third. So if we, for example, over the D minor 7, play a scale that has a B flat instead of a B, like for example F major, we actually avoid that avoid note. So by playing F major or D Aeolian mode, all the other notes are the same, so they're still within the key of C major, so that sounds strong. And we're avoiding the single weak note over that chord by flattening it. Similarly, over the G7, if we play a scale that avoids the C but keeps all the other strong notes, say for example a scale that plays a C sharp instead, which is the D melodic minor scale or the G Lydian dominant, so all the notes are the same except for the C, which is sharpened. We avoid the weak note. Similarly, over the C major 7, the weak note is the F. So if we play a scale that avoids the F by, say, sharpening it, like the G major scale, or the C Lydian mode, then again we avoid that avoid note. And this idea was used a lot in bebop. Because of these avoid notes, often what sort of improvisers would do during the bebop era is sharpen the fourth, so play either Lydian dominant or Lydian modes. But essentially by using these Lydian or Lydian dominant modes and by sharpening the fourth and getting rid of the avoid notes, you can now play whatever you like and it sounds quite strong. Right, so I played the B flat over the D minor 7, the C sharp over the G7, and the F sharp over the C7. So I suppose in conclusion, when you get a new song with a given chord progression, figure out what key it's in, and then just play other keys, other scales, and see what happens. It could sound horrible and absolutely horrendous and sound like a complete train wreck, but it could also sound good and give you some interesting and cool ideas. Anyway, thanks for watching. Feel free to leave any comments or questions. See ya.